All right, Kelly P&R Specialties again in the shop. Another little how-to, if you will. This rig is, I think it's a 74 K10 Square body Chevy that we've been working on for a customer. Typical deal. He had one when he was in high school and he wanted another one. So he found this one. We've done quite a bit of work to it so far. But we've run into a problem. And this is kind of common on, not real common, it's sort of common on solid axle front ends of this era. Let me switch you around. So this guy is obviously all stock. Whoever had the vehicle before him had actually gone through and replaced a bunch of parts. If you look, you can kind of see there's a blue Moog ball joint. Looks like it's got some newer U-joints in it. We just got done putting lift springs on it. It's got a new gearbox. You can see there's no cab on it. We're doing a bunch of other work. We'll be showing you that stuff too. But the problem we have with this particular truck and this particular axle is the ball joint stud is loose inside the knuckle here. Now, for anybody that hasn't had these things apart before, inside here, underneath the nut, inside here is a threaded collar, and that is tapered for the ball joint stud to come up through, but that collar can be centered or it can be offset to help with alignment. The problem with this particular one is that collar isn't seated on the ball joint stud for whatever reason, and hasn't been for quite a while. You can see the kind of metal pieces there. So now the challenge we have is it's been running around like this for a long time. That nut is seized onto the stud. So you can't just unscrew it like you should be able to because it's not seated. What happened here, the correct procedure on these things, when you put one together, you put new ball joints in, you tighten up the lower ball joint, tighten up that nut. Obviously everything else is disassembled. Then you need to thread that collar down into the seat of the upper ball joint. Now, if it's an alignment collar, you have to turn it the right direction. You may be affecting your camber or caster, depending on what you're trying to do. And then you torque this nut, because that torque is what holds that seat and the stud together. I've seen before what happens is, like when it's getting an alignment, for instance, somebody will thread that collar in and it'll stop going in, or at least stop going in easily, because you got the wheel and everything on there pushing against you, and they get the alignment readings that they need, and then tighten up this nut. Well, you could be, depending on how you do it, tightening this nut up against the squish of the ball joints and not seating that stud into the seat. I'm guessing that's what happened. So unfortunately this thing ran around loose for a long time. That's why this is seized. That's why we're gonna have to, cut that off there probably. All right, so what Brad's gonna do to get this thing off of here is slice it right in half. Oops, slice it right in half, right? Okay, Brad got the nut off of there, you can see. Later, it slides over the top of that, and that takes that nut, that sleeve out. So this sleeve is threaded on the outside into this knuckle. But unfortunately, now we're gonna have to take the whole thing apart, which means take the bearing cap off, take the hub apart, take the caliper off, take the rotor off, take the inner spindle off, pull the axle out, take the tie rod loose, and then we can bust the ball joints loose. Alright, Brad's got the cap off here. Next we're going to take this little circlip off. So this truck was a full-time four-wheel drive truck, so it does not have locking hubs in the front. It's permanently locked, so whenever the hub is rotating, it's going to turn the axle shaft and then turn the drive shaft. So we've done a conversion in the transfer case to get rid of the auto, or the full-time four-wheel drive. It's now part-time, so we'll be putting a set of locking hubs in here as well. So there's three pieces to the lock in this. The nut was the first part that Brad's going to take out. It's just a nut. You just got to reach in there, and sometimes it's kind of awkward, and sometimes it's kind of... Oh, tricky. Alright, so this is the inner one, and the difference is it's got that little pin right there. What that pin does is this guy sits on there like this and sits on the pin in one of those holes. So this notch lines up with the groove in the spindle. You'll notice if you look at this guy, those holes don't line up with that notch. So if you run this in, you're going to get it pretty tight, spin the hub, back it off, and then you tighten it up till it's just snug, and then this needs to go on and lock it in place. If it doesn't fit, if you flip it over, the hole will be in a different spot. That's usually enough to get it on there. Then you put the outside one on and you hand tight, but get that as tight as you can. And basically what that's doing is setting your preload on your bearing. And that comes right off. And based on that nice red grease, I'd say that's about bearing's been packed pretty recently. So there's another bearing in here you can't see. There's a bearing inside this hub, or excuse me, this spindle. It's a needle bearing that the axle shaft rides on. So we're going to go and take all these bolts off, pull the spindle, the backing plate will come off with it, and then that'll allow the axle shaft to come out. There's the backing plate. And then this knuckle looks like it's been apart, so we're hoping that spindle will come off easy, but sometimes they fight you. We do make a puller for this, but like I said, this one's been apart recently, so it wasn't very tight. So in the hub, in the inside there, you just barely see, but there's a set of needle bearings. Those are important, especially when you have locking hubs, because whenever you're driving and the hubs are disengaged, the axle doesn't spin, so those needle bearings just sit there and not move. So it's always a good idea to turn your hubs in once in a while and spin them. That kind of slings the grease around. Up there, we made a mark on the knuckle where it was when we took it out, and that lines up with this notch. Now this bushing's purpose is two things, like I described earlier. It's tapered, so the hole's smaller on this side than it is on this side. That's how the ball joint seats. But also, if you need to adjust camber or caster, they make these bushings that are offset. So if your ball joint is in there, instead of going straight in, it would go in at an angle. And that effectively pushes the tire out or in or forward or back. So this one, I think, is a 0. It doesn't appear to be offset at all, but it's severely worn because the ball joint stud was spinning around in there. So we'll have to replace it. Alright, so we got the knuckle off and the vise here. One of the opportunities you have when you're doing this is the upper ball joint. You see where we had to cut that thing. In order to get, you can take this ball joint out by just, kind of hitting on the back side of it. We'd like to use the press though, because that limits the chance of damaging the knuckle. However, if we can't, we won't. So you can see we got the lower one out. Those usually come out pretty easy. You just hit them. But you need that lower ball joint out so you can put the press in there to put the top one in. Whoa, miss it. Oh, you got it. So obviously we gave up on trying to get that arm off and just knocked that thing out with a punch. So Brad was using a big brass punch, not because we care about the ball joint, but don't want to screw up the end of the knuckle where the joint presses in. So that's out. Now we'll press a new one in. All right, so here's our new ball joint. This is the upper ball joint. You can tell because it has the hole in it for the cotter pin. And I was earlier showing you the sleeve that goes in there. This is the new version. So that threads in the knuckle and it just seats on that taper on the ball joint. So, yeah, cool. We got a new one with the ball joint. And this ball joint's a little different than factory ones. They're splined here or ribbed, whatever. And I've never seen this before, honestly. It's got a Zerk fitting on the side, so you actually be able to grease this ball joint when it's in there, which is great. All right, next step is pressing this ball joint in. So this is a ball joint press. You don't have one. I know a lot of like parts stores will let you rent them or borrow them or something like that, but they're not very expensive either. So if you own one of these trucks, probably worth buying one. So we're gonna press this in. This is why we had to have the lower ball joint out. It's because the press goes all the way through. And then we'll do the same thing on the bottom one. All right, second verse, same as the first. We're pressing in the lower ball joint now. It's actually a lot easier to get to. So we're not pressing it all the way in this way, but we're starting it with just the spacer. And then once it gets in there a ways, we'll have to put one of the cups on there so we got room to press into it. All right, so now we've added this little spacer. He's gonna bring it in the rest of the way. Like everything else, it seems like we had to build a tool to make it work right. All right, so we're ready to put it back together. Brad's screwing the little alignment cam in there a ways, just so we got a starting point. Ball joints are all pressed into the knuckle. Make a fancy tool for this, of which I can't find mine today, so. So the correct way of doing this is, like we're doing here, Brad, is we're going to tighten up that lower ball joint first. Once that's tight, then we're going to come up here and run that sleeve down so it makes contact with the taper of the upper ball joint. And then tighten the upper nut. I want to make sure that sleeve is down all the way like that. Otherwise, we'll end up with the same problem we had with the structure before. And that lower nut is a self-locking nut, so oftentimes it'll start spinning the ball joint when you're just about done. But it's got a little slot in it. You can stick a screwdriver in there or something and hold it. All right, so now, mortal words of David Freiberger, we're going to show you how to do the right thing the wrong way, because my socket's missing. So we'll probably have to tap this in with a hammer, but we've got the lower ball joint tight, and now we need to spin that insert till it seats up with the ball joint, like I said. I'll show you how to do that the wrong way. We made it easier for the next guy. Brad put NECs on there, so the next time this has to come off, it will. Okay, so there are upper and lower ball joints installed. We got a cutter key in there, it's ready to go. Brad's gonna grease it. There's a Zerk fitting down there, and then there's one you saw up on top. And then reinstall all the other stuff. Just basically reverse the procedure of taking it apart. So Brad's just using a little pick to reach in there and grab that guy. Hopefully, pull it out. Comes out easy when you're taking the bearings out, but this side doesn't need to come apart. So that little guy, no longer needed. So the hubs we're putting on this truck are the Warren standard hubs, and the difference there is the standard hubs, that piece that he's got is aluminum. The premium hubs from Warren, that'd be steel. But this truck is by no means a rock crawler, mostly highway service, 4-wheel drive, half ton. Standard ones will be just fine. So, like you saw there, throw that guy in. This retaining ring is what keeps the actual hub in so it doesn't fall out, because that would be bad. Depending on your application, you may or may not need this snap ring. Basically, if it fits, use it. sometimes the end of the shaft won't have a snap ring groove in it. So what he's doing there is he's just reaching around, pushing the U-joint out so you can confirm that the snap ring is engaged in the splines. And then the next thing is to make sure your holes are lined up in the end. Pretty straightforward. He had already put a little lube on the O-ring around here, so it's gonna go in there nice and easy. And then you put the screws in. Test it, which it's on the free mode right now, so you look there, yep, U-joint's not turning. Locks it. Hey, U-joint's turning.
It should only be